Hi folks, welcome to another episode of My Life with Robert Burns. This is where we have a chat with one of our Burns cronies from around the Burns world. Doing things a wee bit different tonight, folks. Tonight, interviewing our crony along with myself is the guy who was the very first interviewee, the very first person that we grilled on My Life with Robert Burns. Please welcome Bobby Jess.
Hello there, Douglas.
How you doing, Bobby?
I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to this.
Nice to have you back on here.
I was just thinking, you and Jim have had it all your way for all these podcasts. Now it's my turn. Jim might think he can what questions I'm going to ask, but I might throw in a curveball just to unsettle him a wee bit.
Well, folks, you probably guessed the reason Bobby's joined us is our interviewee tonight is former president of the World Federation, former president of Newcombe Burns Club, and an author. Tonight, cronies everywhere, please welcome Jim Thompson.
Hi, everybody. Douglas, Bob, I'm looking forward to this.
Well, folks, we should tell you about the dress rehearsal we had. We were kindly invited to Prestwick Burns Club, where the committee asked us along to do a live version of My Life with Robert Burns. So we had a wee practice on Thursday night of last week. Prestwick Burns Club, as expected, were very hospitable, looked after us very well, and gave us some difficult questions to tackle. So tonight we'll maybe repeat some of these questions, but let's just get started in the usual way, Jim, and ask you the normal question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Certainly can, Douglas. I was born in Newcombe in a house called Smithfield in Cornwall Park, just round the corner from Lochshinnock Mine, where my father was a shop firer. That was 1954, and we lived there. Well, my mother and father lived there after they got married, and I was the first child in the union. I went to primary school at the Bank School, which is, in fact, no, that logo was knocked down just up the road from where I stayed. And then, as mining in the 50s and 60s was, the men just moved about for the job. So I moved, and I went to eventually 6 primary schools. When I left the bank, I went to Auchinleck Primary School because I was staying with my granny, and then I went to Green Mill in Cumnock, followed by Mauchline, and then we moved south, and we went to a place called Ollerton in mid-Nottinghamshire. It's quite famous in the Robin Hood story, Ollerton. It's near Edmonstowe, where the Major Oak was. And I went to the primary school there, and then we moved to Clipston, and I went to Clipston Primary School. After that, I sat the 11 plus, obviously, at the age of 11, and for some unknown reason managed to pass it, and was offered a place at a grammar school. The schools around about where we stayed were all comprehensive, modern academies. The old-fashioned grammar schools were sliding out, and I was offered a place at one called Sherwood Hall Grammar School for boys, and we didn't think I'd be able to go because of the cost, but as it turned out, there was bursaries available, and because it was actually very expensive for particular mum and dad. My father had 2 jobs, and my mother didn't work because she had 3 wains. So that allowed me to go there, and to be honest with you, it was one of the greatest times of my life. I really enjoyed the school. It was very, very formal and organised, but there's quite a few things about it that I really enjoyed. One was it was non-denominational, so everybody went to the school assembly. Having said that, those of the Catholic faith, Islamic faith, or Jewish faith could leave after the assembly was by before the religious part started, but nobody ever did that I saw, because we always sung Jerusalem every morning. We sung, and it was great fun. It really was. Everybody belted it out. I mean, we sung like 280 boys in the school, going through 6 years. And the bottom line to it was great fun. I also was fortunate to have an English teacher that introduced me to Shakespeare, which I now adore. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And he also introduced me to J.R.R. Tolkien. And to this day, I read The Lord of the Rings every October. Every time I hit October, I read The Lord of the Rings. And then one of the loves of my life, I've got to be honest and say, was the first year I was in school. I mean, I was about 11 and a half, 12-year-old. They had a school concert every year, and it was always Gilbert and Sullivan. And the first year it was the Pirates of Penzance, and I thought, this is great. And then the next year I got a walk-on, a non-singing part, I might add. I got a walk-on, and I remember it's a boys' school, so we all had to dress up as girls. I got a walk-on in the Mikado, and since that day, really, I've done it many times. I've been to see Gilbert and Sullivan, and I've now got Sheena completely, utterly involved in it as well. In fact, the last time we were at York, we went to see the Gondoliers, and we had a great day out. So that was me, but again, we had to move back up.
Before you tell us about that, I'm just, I can see Bobby wiping the sweat off his brow there, because I thought for a minute you were going to sing.
Hey, I once interviewed a guy, right, breaking into houses in Paisley, right, true story this, breaking into houses in Paisley, and he get caught red-handed by the Bobbies one night, and the modus operandi he was using, the MO he was using, right, related to about another 40 houses. And I mean, I was interviewing him, I didn't think he was getting charged with them all, because the MO was so exact, and there was other evidence. So I was interviewing him anyway, and I says to him, "Are you going to tell me, are you going to confess to breaking into these houses?" He says, "Mr. Thompson, I might be daft, but I'm not mental." And I thought to myself, that's a great saying. And I might be daft, but I'm not mental either, so I'm only singing in this tonight, that's for sure.
Thank goodness for that.
But to continue, we moved on up, and I ended up in Cumnock Academy. In the second year at Cumnock Academy, and I served my time in Cumnock Academy. I actually left at the end of third year and got a job at the pit. I got a place on the engineering and management training course at the Killich. And both my granny and my mother were greeting, because my granny lost a nephew, my mother lost a cousin at the Barney, and my father had been doing their shinnock at the mines rescue, and they really didn't want their wains going into the pit. So I ended up going back to school. And at the end of 6th year, I applied for a pharmacy course at Glasgow University, University in Glasgow, and was accepted, but I didn't go because of the circumstances and various other things. Got a wee job for the summer, basically, as an apprentice quantity surveyor. And then, after discussions with my father, influence from him, I joined the police in 1973. Served for 30 years. Great career, loved it. In fact, I mean, there's a saying in the police that the job's you know what, but it wasn't the job, it was the folk that were saying it. The job's a great job, it really is. It's just, the career I had was fantastic, particularly when I was a detective, because the freedom you had was amazing. It really was. There was none of this cloaking in and out. You went, you worked, you did your best. And I finished up. I started in Kilmarnock and finished in Kilmarnock. And I spent quite a lot of time in the homes, the Home Office Large Major Inquiry Unit, which was extremely difficult and challenging, but extremely rewarding as well. It was just fantastic. I remember I did the Buccleuch Street murder, where Emily Mutcher, an 80-odd-year-old woman, was killed. And I ended up with the biggest door-to-door inquiry in the history of the British police. It was huge, it was enormous. And I ended, and one of the unique events in it was that it was the first time in Scotland there had been 2 incident rooms melded together on the one inquiry, no separate inquiries, on the one inquiry. And that was very challenging. And fortunately, the guy was caught about, I think it was about 8 years after the crime, purely and simply because they started DNA and everybody, and his DNA came up. So I finished that. I retired. Well, just before I retired, I'd applied for membership in the Chartered Management Institute and got membership. And just before, about a year before I retired, they got in contact with me telling me I should try and upgrade to fellow. So I got the typist to fill out the forms because I couldn't. I'm not joking. I just told the girl to give her the information. She up the stairs, the girl was great with me. Did that, sent it away, and then I got that. And I thought when I got that back, I was a fellow of the chapter. That would mean something, and it really meant nothing, is the honest truth. But I thought that I could maybe use that for something else. So I decided to start my own business. So basically, I retired on the last day of February, but I left the previous year. I left at the end of December. And my finishing day was a Friday, and I started my own business on the Monday, and it was all set up. And I'd spent the 2 months setting it up, getting everything ready, and obviously going on holiday, because at the same point in time, it was my 50th birthday. So I went out, had a nice holiday and came back. When I came back, I started my own business. And I did that up until basically 2 years ago. 2 years ago. I wound the company down 2 years past this month, just at the tax date. So I finished that, and I enjoyed doing that as well. I ended up doing lots of mostly HR stuff, because that was the kind of job I finished in at the end. And that's me a wee bit in a nutshell, I suppose.
What about other stuff, Jim? What about things that you did out with your working week? Hobbies and interests, that kind of thing?
Well, hobbies and interests are basically 2. Basketball and burns. And we'll come to burns later, so I don't want to talk about that. But basketball, I played it up until I was 65. I was never the greatest player. I was actually quite efficient when I played in the national leagues as a 20-something. Purely and simply because I was really quite quick and a good defender. But I've loved the sport, and I still do. In fact, I'm still the vice chair of the Strathclyde Basketball League Association, which is basically the West of Scotland basketball now. I've been on that committee since 1990. I think I was arguing with Alan Turner, who a lot of folk watching this will know, recently, because Alan thought I was earlier than that, but I wasn't. It must have been about 94. I went on to the committee, and I've been on it ever since, doing various jobs. But basically, I knew I'm a hanger-on, and I've got to the stage where I think it's maybe time for me to move on from that. I still love the sport. I still watch it. Still get involved, and then I get involved in refereeing as well. And I was a better referee than I was a player by a long way. I ended up a grade 1 and doing at the highest level in Scotland, and doing some internationals, including the school internationals as well. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I still do. I watch it. In fact, I was watching a game last night, and I thoroughly enjoy the sport. And that's just about it in terms of hobbies.
But was basketball something you started at school?
Aye, Cumnock Academy.
Aye.
Right, Jimmy Davison, who taught, and it's just basically the old academy before we moved to the new academy. That kind of cursed gym hall that you ran into the walls where the climbing racks were and all that sort of thing. The bars. I started there, and played. In fact, we had a good school team, a couple of internationals in it, and did really well in terms of. In fact, we went to the semi-final of the Scottish Cup one year. But just played it all ever since then. You know, just love it. I just thoroughly enjoy it.
And is it a game that you've travelled the world to go and see teams and such like?
Oh, I every time I'm in America, I'm saying. In fact, I remember taking the kids once. Were in Florida to a Magic game when they had Shaquille O'Neal playing. And if you don't know basketball, you'll not know who Shaquille O'Neal is. But he was a giant of a man, 7'2". He still is, obviously, but he knew he's even bigger because he's wider now. But then he'd only 8% body fat, and he moved like a gazelle, and he could jump through the ceiling. He was unique, and will remain unique in the sport. I mean, he's obviously a Hall of Famer, and he won 4 titles, 3 with the Lakers, and then one with Miami. A wonderful, wonderful player. And he was playing against another great centre, Alonzo Mourning, who eventually won it with Miami as well, won a title with Miami. And it was a great game, and the kids loved it because it was the stuff that was happening all around about it. But like, you know, they were coming out and you could throw a ball through a hoop, and they would make it go through the hoop, and they gave you a wee prize. But it was April Fool's Day, so everybody got a present on the way in. I got an invisible skipping rope. It was 2 handles. You know, it was great fun. I loved it. Kids loved it. You know, after that was aim sold, you know.
When we were at Prestwick, they tended to throw questions at us that were maybe a bit unusual, given that they were interviewing both of us together. And I don't know if you remember, one of the questions was when they discovered we were at the same school. They asked if we'd known each other at school, and I commented that I was a couple of months older than you. But if you don't know if you remember your reply.
Aye, well, I mean, the only time I knew of you was at the Scout disco on a Friday night, and the Albatross played, because we used to go there when I was about, I must have been about 16 or thereabouts. Used to go there, obviously looking for talent or whatever. And you ran the disco. And as I said, Albatross was always on at the end for a wee smooch. Aye.
Yeah, we were proud to have the first ultraviolet light in Cumnock.
That's right, it was an ultraviolet light. That's right. Yeah, but the thing was, this isn't the days, right? I mean, some folk will know it, what the youngies will know it. This was in the days of Levi, you know, stay press, right? And if you had the slightest wee, and it was Baratia blazers you had to wear, black blazers. Douglas, you'll remember all this, right? And see the slightest wee spot, it showed up with this ultraviolet light. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare.
Oh, very good. Anyway, before we move on, how about the family? You want to give them a mention?
Aye, well, Cumnock Academy didn't just educate me, it gave me the love of my life. She and I were in the same class at school, and basically, I thinking about it, to be honest with you, if it was happening there, I'd probably get arrested for stalking, because I used to follow her about like a daft dog, you know, up to the corridors, and eventually she gave in, you know. So there's power to persistence, and we started going out. And we've been together ever since. We got married in 75, and she was 19 and I was 21, just turned 21. And we've been, you know, in 1978, Raymond came along with my son, and then in 1980, Susan, my daughter. And Raymond's now got 2 children. The oldest is my granddaughter Freya, who's 11 going on about 26, whose only interest is horses. And while she used to be great and come here all the time, now it's just no time, you know, so it's her pals and Twitter or TikTok on the phone, and her horses that. And Callan, he's right into this. I don't know, they put masks on and stuff. I don't know, I get lost with it all. but they can do virtual reality. I think it's kind of technical. I mean, I don't know what he's doing, because you just see him going about the house and he's got this big thing on his head. That's his kind of, he's into gaming. He's a big gamer. And I've got a 2-year-old who basically rules my life. Leah, my daughter's child. And she's with us most days because her parents work and we don't. So we've got her. And I think we'll be going on holiday all together, so shortly as well, because the plan is to do it next month. But Leah's passport's the problem. They tell us it's ready, but they're not going to send it to us. So unless we've got a passport, we're not going in. And that's the family. And to be honest, it's they say family is the most important thing in your life, and without hesitation, it definitely is for me.
Good, good. Well, you mentioned that in your hobbies, there was two. There was basketball and there was buns. And we've heard about the basketball, so I'm now going to pass over to Bobby to get you talking about your interest in buns.
Hi there, Jim.
Hi, Bobby. Nice to see you now.
Appreciating that you've had a long and very distinguished Burns career, I'm going to test your memory. When did you first bump into Robert Burns?
It would be 1968 at Copenhagen Academy. We Bobby McCallum's father, Jimmy. Folk will know Bobby McCallum, and hopefully one day we'll get Bobby on this. His dad had polio and ended up with calipers, and then eventually into a wheelchair. And he worked at Pitt, and he became a teacher at Copenhagen Academy, and he was Burns, and his dying day was Burns there. And he introduced me to it. And then a couple of years later, when I went into 4th year, Ian Hogg was my teacher, and Ian Hogg was obviously a past president at the Copenhagen Burns Club, and a great Burns, and he really lit the fuse with me for Burns. And that was when my first meeting, I actually, if I do an immortal memory, I start out with saying I first met Robert Burns as a 14-year-old in Ayr Road in Cumberland. And that's the truth.
And did you get taught Burns at school?
Yes, well, in fact, you could use it for your O-level. You couldn't do it for higher, right enough, but you could use it for your O-level. And I did it at O-level. And I'm right my memory because it was quite an obscure thing I did at the time, and it just isn't. But I think it was to A Mountain Daisy, actually. I think that was the poem. But by the time I got to higher, I was so far into Shakespeare anyway. I was just using Shakespeare because it was dead easy. It was easier. It's easier, simple, it's straightforward. There's with Burns, you've got to dig.
Yeah, there's often 2 or 3 meanings in Burns poems. What about your first Burns supper?
Well, the first Burns supper was a school Burns supper, and to be honest, it was okay, but it wasn't the greatest thing in the world. But the first Burns supper that I actually physically went to as an adult was a police Burns supper in Kilmarnock, and it must have been round about 77, 78, I think it might have been. I was in the CID, the detective constable at the time, and my pal who stayed at the back from me, him and I decided we'd like to go, and we went, and it was a wake-up call for me in terms of Burns. Because what happens, I think a lot of the time is, well, what happened to me, and I think it's repeated by other people, is you're into Burns at the school, and then you're getting on with life. You're either at college or university, or you're working, and you've got a family. There's other priorities in your life. So it fell away from me, and I think it does for a lot of people. But then I came back to it, and I went to that Burns supper, and it was the Reverend Jimmy Curry was doing the memory, and Desmond Brown, who was the local defence solicitor, who became the local MP, and now Lord Brown, who was eventually in Gordon Brown's Labour government. He was the Minister for Defence for the country. He was doing Toast of the Lassies, and it was going great right up until one of the local fiscals decided to take exception with Jimmy Curry talking about the Masons during the immortal memory, which is an integral part of Burns's life. You can't say he wasn't a Mason, right? So I said that to Steve. I remember it just like, because we're sitting there, no stone cold sober. We'd had a couple of beers and that was it. I'm sitting there as a young detective, thinking myself, the divisional commander's in here. I don't want to cause any bother. So I said to Stephen, I think we should leave. I says, because I can see this kicking off. And he agreed, and we left, and we walked up the road home. And I think there was an incident or two, but it was all calmed down. But I thought, I don't want to be in there. I've got a career here. I just, I'm going somewhere in this job. I just don't want to ruin it. And that was my first sort of fun supper. And then when I get promoted to sergeant, first of all to A Division, and then moved to K Division, which was Paisley. A Division was right in the middle of Glasgow, and I get moved there, and I get a wee bit involved there, and ended up going to the Burns Supper, and I did the haggis at the Paisley Burns Supper. I think that must have been about 1982 or something, and I did a wee bit back and forward, and then eventually did my first real speaking at Burns Supper was at the Polish Burns Supper, where I did a toast to the division. It was one of these intermediate toasts, because they weren't going to let me loose in something important. And that was where it just picked up for there, Bobby, to be honest. And once I got promoted again, well, I got promoted to Kilmarnock, and by that time I was kind of involved in, police events and stuff like that. And then about 18 months later, I got promoted again, Chief Inspector to Cumnock. And when I went to Cumnock, that was when I got really involved with Burns, purely and simply because the local provost, Jimmy Boyd, who was also the vice convener of the police board, he liked the idea of partnership working all the time. So he was bringing folk into my office all the time for a cup of tea and a blether. And one of them was the local head of social work, and that was Jim Hasler, whom lots of folk watching this will know. And Jim and I became extremely close friends. In fact, we were kind of bosom buddies. We went everywhere together for quite a few years. And then he introduced me to my other great pal in Burns, and that was Joe Kennedy. He took me along to an event at the Bachelors Club. And that was Jim and I used to, and he says to me, he got me to go up and speak at Newcombe, not as a member, at the Smoker, as the sort of, I don't know what they call it, but folk who don't know Newcombe don't know the Smoker is to develop younger talent. When I say younger talent, fresher talent, different. They don't need to be young in age, but they've no spoken at anything. You'll not be able to speak at the Burns Supper at Newcombe unless you spoke at the Smoker. It's just as simple as that. And they always invite a guest speaker, and I don't know what the name for it is, but I call it a guest speaker. So I was invited along because I was local chief of police, and I went up there and talked to them and was invited to join. I went to the first Burns Supper, I think it was I'm saying 96, but it could be 97. But it was around then I went to the first Burns Supper, and at the same point in time, Jim Haslett had become president of the Howth Burns Club in Kilmarnock, and he then said to me, look, my vice president is just moving. It was a lady, and she was moving away. It was his ex-girlfriend. I'm not going to go into all the details, but she was moving away, and he says, I need a vice president. I says, I'm not even a member of the club. She's got to join, and I'll get you as vice president. So I joined Kilmarnock Howth, and a year later I was the president. It was as simple as that. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm still a member of the Howth. I don't go to as much, very rarely go to stuff now, because basically I just don't have the time. But that sounds strange for an old retired man, but it's genuinely, I just don't have the time. But I loved it, and eventually I joined Greenock as well, because I think the mother club should be supported. And I joined Kilmarnock Number Nothing when they were struggling, and the minute they got up to speed and passed the Howth, I came back at it because it wasn't my kind of thing. And that was the gist of it. But I suppose where I really honed the blade of my involvement with Burns would be the Air Police Burns Supper. which you spoke at, right? And when I started at it, I was asked to chair it, and I'd never chaired anything before. It must have been about 98 or something. And I chaired that one supper, and I just loved it, and I liked the format. And at that time, it was 400 odd that went to it. That was before they cut it for the health and safety. And I don't know how many times I've spoken to it since. And I don't really, I've told them, anytime they want anything, I'll do it. Same when you come up, anytime you want anything, I'll do it. You don't need to phone me because I'll not care if you don't. But if you do, I'll be there. And they've taken out my word, the Polish sponsor. What is it, the last sponsor they had? I got phoned on the Saturday to say there was a guy, Al Lawrence was supposed to be doing a toast to the bun supper because it was 40 years old. And he just didn't know well. So they scrabbled something in the half hour before they get picked up, and just went there. And I said, I'm not going up on the stage. I'm not going on the top table. So I sat with my guests and just walked up, and I did the 10 minutes they wanted. So I love it. But I still, I mean, I've got to be honest and say, there's a place in me that tells me you come, that's the best ever. And that's probably biased, to be honest, because I've been at a lot of great bun suppers. But I just think that you come up, for me, is special.
I mean, speaking at the police bun supper has been one of my highlights. As you say, it's a very special occasion up at Troon. I hear what you're saying about the suppers, but is there one in particular that stands out as the best for you, Jim?
Yes, and an odd one, but just speaking about the Polish bun supper, I was talking, when we were at Prestwick last week, Jimmy Gibson he'd never been there, and Jimmy is an enormous individual in the buns world, although he would never, he's so modest and unassuming. But I managed to persuade Jimmy to come along, and he was gobsmacked with that bun supper. He really was. And he still talks about it to this day because it's unique and it's different. And I can't remember. I think it was the boy Sinclair, the actor, because his brother is actually the chairman at the moment. Andy Sinclair's the chairman. John Gordon Sinclair, I think he was speaking at that night as well. However, in terms of one bun supper, there's one bun supper that I'll remember forever. And to be honest with you, it was a great night. A pal of mine, John Marshall, who was a very senior police officer before he retired, head of counter-terrorism for Scotland. John and I have been pals through the basketball for years. I've known John since he was a boy. And he phoned me up and says, my dad, his father's name was Weir, lovely man, he's dead now, but he's a lovely man. He says, my father's trying to organise a bun supper for Dunmellan Bowling Club. Right? He says, I says, aye, tell me to phone me, it's no problem. So we're phoning, he says, look, Jim, he says, we need a right good toast to the lassies. He says, going to come up and get your best. I says, aye, what? He says, oh, it's an all-male do. He says, it's, he says, it's one of these nights you'll get away with anything. He says, I know you're not a sphere or all that. He says, but you'll get away with anything. He says, it's no bother. So I says, right, that's fine. I thought, but right. And then he phoned me back. He says, look, I'm going to get you picked up. He says, there's one of the Thompson lads is going to, what? Say, he'll pick you up at that big petrol station at the motorway command. It's just, he'll get you there. So I rise up there and there's this guy. Raymond Cars was his name. He was one of the accordionists in the Thompson lads. And I'm blathering to this guy all the way up, and it's great, and blah, blah, blah. So I arrive, and there's all these women, and the local minister, and the priest, and a few, sort of high agents and Dunmellan and stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, what have I got in this script? Now, I had one or two that I'm thinking about, nothing that would be ridiculous, but I thought, nah, I'm going to have to change some of this. Right, but however, as I'm sitting there, right, it was incredible, and I could talk for the next 2 hours about this bun supper, but I'll cut to the chase with it. The lassie who was doing the reply to me right? They put a bottle of vodka in front of her at the start with cans of Coca-Cola, right? And by the time it got to that, right, and there was incident after incident after incident. I mean, it really was. It was hilarious. After it got that, she got to the stage, right, that she could hardly bite her fingernails, and she had this speech written, and it was a poem thing, right, that she'd written. Okay, and she got up to do it, and she sat next to me, and she couldn't. So I'm having to go up and tell her what to say. And she's like, and then she was just saying it because she couldn't read. She was so blind drunk, literally, she couldn't do it. And just as it gets finished, Raymond Carse, who's there to play, and he was brilliant on this squeeze box, and where Marshall could sing, can I tell you? He was chanting, I mean, it was brilliant. The music was fantastic. It's one of the best concerts I've ever heard for music. Raymond Carse jumps up just as she's finished and jumps up and says, "Right, folks, it's time for," and they're all shouting, "Ramondo Bongo," and he starts a magic act. Seriously, I mean, I'm just joking. A magic act about supper. And I was floored. The tears were running down my cheeks. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. And he gets this guy up who's drunk out his mind and steals his watch. The guy just didn't know, and all that sort of stuff. Then he gets to the end and he says, "Now," and he gets with this lassie, Margaret, I think her name was, she was sitting next to me, and he says, "You're going to volunteer to be involved with Ramondo Bongo?" She's, because she's up for it, she's feeling like it, she's no care what's happening, right? So he says, "Right," he says, "This, ladies and gentlemen," he says, "is the greatest stunt knocking man." So he's get up and he goes up behind her and he puts his hand on his mate, and then he comes back round, and I don't know where he got them, but he got the biggest pair of women's knickers you've ever seen in your life, and it was "Ramondo Bongo, we've got them, boys," right? And she's so drunk, right? So he always lets out his back pocket or something. And she's so drunk, she goes, "Oh, no, that," and she lifts her skirt up the way to look. And the place, there were folk, the minister, I thought the minister was going to wet himself. And the priest at the end of the table, he couldn't, he was like this because it was so funny, you know, it was really the funniest thing I've ever seen. And I mean, to this day, I talk about that one supper, and every time John Marshall and I together, there's another bit comes back to mind. You know, it's just one of the nights, and that's without hesitation of my doubt the greatest one supper I've ever been at.
Brilliant.
Well done, Jim. That's one we missed out when we were talking to Preston the other night. But can I remind you of a couple of more serious questions that we got asked? And our good friend Samantha Brown asked a question about your book and how you'd come to write it and such like. Is that something you can tell us about?
Aye, well, it's an old story now, I've got to be honest and say, but I was at Dreghorn Bowling Club doing a burn supper for Eddie McCall. Great Burns in, who's a ex-colleague of mine. And I was sitting to talk to him. It was Angus Middleton was there as well. But the wee guy who was chairing it was the chairman of the bowling club. And Angus and I were talking bits and for Tam O'Shanter and blah blah blah. And this wee man was asking me, and I was giving me anecdotes about the poem. And Angus and I were talking again, and he says, "You know, that stuff's not really that well known," and blah blah blah. I says, "Maybe I'll do a briefing paper or something." And this all started with Sanny Drain, Alexander Drain, who was known as my booking agent. Because every time he phoned me, we go to a burn supper, because I would pick him up and bring him home again and look after him, right? And his wife Margot loved that because she knew I would get him in the front door because he had Parkinson's and all sorts of bother, Sanny. But he was one of the best readers I've ever heard. I mean, he started learning Burns poems at the age of 50 and could recite 47 Burns poems. And not just the wee ones, huge. I mean, Sanny was a great, you know. And I used to go with him and Joe Kennedy to places and things like that. So Sanny, I thought Sanny was a genius. Sanny was, "Oh, you're near this and Tam O'Shanter, and he would tell you these wee stories about Tam O'Shanter," because he was reciting it. And I thought Sanny knew all this. It turns out Mario's cousin was the convener at Suter Johnny's College. So that's where Sally got his stories for this, educated individual down there. I should have known better with Sally right enough. So what had started that night at that bowling club was I decided to start researching, and it was best part of 3 years, about 2.5 to 3 years, chasing my tail around stuff, and I ended up with all that stuff on the poem. Because the problem is it's me. I can't, to a fault. I've got no, as you say, everything for place for everything and everything in its place. And I couldn't leave it once I started. And I was following it round and round and round. And eventually it was getting to fallout stages with Mrs. Thompson. And anybody who asks me what her first name is Mrs. So I just, in fact, we spent a day down in New Galloway, me looking for a doctor's grave, and the graveyard, I would never have done it had that lady minister not come up. But anyway, we found the grave, and that was kind of getting to the end of look, I've got patience for this thing, and I thought, right, I need to get this together. So I did, and I went to that place in Catherine to see if they would publish it. But the problem with that was that they wanted the rights to it, and I thought, nah, I'm not giving this away. This is just for me. Folk might buy it and read it, but I'm not caring. This is about me. It's not about anything else. So I did a self-publish with a company in Irvine, and printed 1,500, and I think I've got about 20 left or thereabouts. And I just sold them enough to get my money back, basically. And once I got my money back, I started giving them away. I gave some fellas.
Is there any big surprises in your research?
Aye, quite a few. I mean, the issue for me is that when you go to an event at a bowling club, a golf club, even a local Burns club, folks see Tam O'Shanter as this drunk man with the DTs making up an excuse for the wife, and it's anything but that. There's nothing. I mean, whilst it has got a light humour to it at places, there's nothing humorous about it. It's about witchcraft, devil worship, and all sorts of demonic things. And it really is demonic, because there's issues in there with, there's references. If you look and you understand that Haley table, for example, Douglas. Haley is, folks say, oh, that's a holy table, and it can mean that, but if you look up the Scots dictionary, Scots language dictionary, you'll find that Haley also means to leave your ground untilled in propitiation to the devil. So you're no feeding your family to worship the devil. So the Haley table meant that the stuff on there belonged to the devil. And there's stuff on there like waistband line with young crescent bairns. That's not what Burns' children lost no long before they started writing it. It's because witches used to abduct, young, children that hadn't been christened, right, and had not spoken, or they would dig them up if they died, and cut parts off them and made pies and they ate them. Now, whilst a lot of the witch stuff is just rubbish, the covens were real. These folk believed what they believed. And and given the superstitions and the knowledge of the people at the time, they would understand everything Burns was writing. I mean, Burns didn't write that for us. He wrote it for the folk in the 1790s. And that's why that's what I loved about it. And there's loads of it, and some of the stuff. I mean, like one wee unique thing, right? Burns takes a line from the poem Chevy Chase, about the battle of, the Lord and Northumberland and the Scots, right, and the Cheviot Hills. He takes a line from that and he puts it straight in Tam O'Shanter. He read that line as a 7-year-old because it was in Masson's release, and that's the only place he could have seen it. And he just took it, he takes it and he puts it in. It very, very slightly adopts it, but it's there. And that to me was the genius of Burns. That, you know, absolutely perfect memory for everything that I had before.
Wow. I noticed Bobby's got the book there.
I'm a very proud owner of this book, Jim, and it was signed by yourself, so I'm doubly proud. And I certainly would recommend it to anybody that's reading or read Tam O'Shanter and wants to know the ins and outs. It's very enlightening and well done. I've heard you. Well, you've been doing research into Willie Fisher as well. Is there plans for a book in Holy Willie?
Well, there was at the start, but the corrupting issue for me is that the Mauchline Kirk session took Gavin Hamilton to the Kilmarnock Justices, and I can't find the records. And given what I'm going to say about Gavin Hamilton, and to some extent Robert Burns, who was very much a deluded individual in this whole thing, I don't think it would be fair for me to publish a book without having some sort of data trail to the actual documents. Now the rest of it's in the Kirk session and the Presbytery Air. Now the Presbytery Air's no bother, you can go in there and read it. It's because it was Dr. Devaney who wrote it. However, the Kirk session of Mauchline was written by John Noble, who was the session clerk. Right, and the bottom line to it is he can't even spell Mauchline, and he writes in 3 lines, above into below and below into above, and it's a nightmare. It takes you a full day to do 1 page to transcribe it. It's a nightmare, and I've done all the transcribing, it's all done. Right, but the problem I've got with it all, to be honest with you, I used to love Jim Mackay's stuff, and I think Jim Mackay's biography of Burns is probably the best one, right, for me anyway. Everybody's got different views and things. But for me, it's the most inclusive of Burns. But he's edited all this stuff out. Now he's read the stuff because he mentions it. He mentions about Gavin Hamilton keeping the stent money. Right? He took 3 years stent money. Stent was a collection of 1 pence in the pound for rental value of property in the parish to feed the poor. And it was to stop begging. That was why it was introduced, to stop aggressive begging. And he kept it for 3 years. He took it for 3 years and kept all the money. And that's where the row starts between Gavin Hamilton and the Kirk session. And they go on about this. There's all sorts of stuff in it. And I mean, it'd take me all night to tell you about it. But the bottom line to it is, Hamilton, right, is the only person at the meeting of Ayr Presbytery and the Kirk session, the night is discussed. And what happened was, Hamilton had preempted it because John Noble was also, you know, he was telling Gavin Hamilton everything. He'd preempted bother with that, saying that when he went to take a token on a Sunday, he was wrongly counselled for doing something, right? And that's what he went to Ayr Presbytery about the Kirk session about. Know about stent money, because he knew he'd stolen that. He couldn't avoid that, right? And that was to throw everybody off the script. And he's the only person who's there that can tell, because nobody else is going to tell Burns, because the only other 2 Mauchline folk that were there were Willie Fisher as a lay member, right, and Daddy Auld, and they're not going to tell Burns the same day, right? But the problem with that is Burns then uses the only person he can use, Willie Fisher, as the vehicle for Holy Willie's prayer, which is a magnificent poem. I mean, the first 6 lines of that are fantastic. The first 6 lines tell you everything you need to know about new licks and old licks. Right? There's a predestination, or you've earned your place in heaven. It's all there in the first 6 lines.
Can you remind our viewers the first 6 lines, Jim?
No, I couldn't offhand, Bobby. No, it's no. No, I couldn't. No, it's no a poem that I've ever learned.
Well, thou in the heavens as well, as it pleases best thyself, sends into heaven and tend to hell, or for thy glory, and no for any good or ill. There's dinner for thee.
And that's the argument between Calvinism and Arminianism, right? Jacob Arminius, John Calvin. That's the entire argument, right? Predestination in Calvinism and Arminianism, you need to earn your way into heaven. And that's done in 6 lines. I just think that's amazing.
Jim, you were the president of the Robert Burns World Federation. What year was that?
I went on in 2014, Bobby.
About 14. So obviously that's going to be one of your special highlights of your Burns career. What stuck in your mind about that year? And what direction do you see the Federation going forward from here?
Well, what stuck in my mind about 2014 was I went in for a quadruple bypass with my heart. But no, the big issue is when I was junior vice president, Jane Brown was president, and we ran into some bother in terms of finance. And one of the issues with it was we weren't being given any information. Just because I'm not going to go into details with individuals, well, but it happened. And eventually I lost the plot and says, right, then if nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to do this. Because the people who were being paid to do it weren't. We had no financial information for free executive committee meetings. So that started in the February, or the January of 2014. And I was given access to the software, read it, and realised we were in an awful lot, that it was going to be a year in the red and it was going to be vicious. Somewhere in the region of £50,000, I reckon, at the start there. So I called a meeting and went down to the Globe and spoke to Jane. And you have no idea of my value of that lady. There were men who couldn't have taken the decisions she took. And it's all very well saying somebody else was going to be the bad man. Me, I don't mind being the bad man. I grew up being the bad man, right? But it was her decisions. She had to make them. She had to have the strength of character to take these decisions. And she took them. And what resulted was me, folk were taking dolls of me home and sticking pencils in them and needles and stuff, because there was no governance at all. And I wrote a financial management plan and I put governance in place, which is still there to this day. And I started looking towards causing income streams to grow and spending to stop. And that's what happened over the next 5 years when I was financial director. We cut what we were spending as close to the wood as we could, and we increased streams of income. Right, but the problem with that was she was having to stand up at the conference in September at Irvine in 2014, and I says, there's no way you're standing up to tell them about this. You've had the greatest year, I think, in my time in the Federation as the president. She was wonderful. And I just can't describe how good she was, because she was a smiling, happy face. She was a horn to shake. She was the best ambassador, since Angus Middleton for the Federation, is the honest truth. But she was great. And I wasn't letting that lassie go with a whimper. She was going out with a bang. She was going to enjoy her conference. And by that time, I was a conference convener as well, because somebody else had run away and left it. So I had to sort that. Right, and that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. I'm a big busy boy. Right, so anyway, we get to the conference and I'm in. And the first thing I'm thinking is, I need to be going to Ravana. I'm in hospital. Can I go? And I had 31 burn suppers on the list for the February, and I got done in the December. And I managed to make 28 of them. And they were all great. I thoroughly enjoyed them, but it was too many, is the honest truth for me at that point in time. And I ended up with another heart attack in the March. And it kind of took away the gloss, because I couldn't go to Havana, because I couldn't fly. And I couldn't go other places that I planned to go. But having said all that, I had a thoroughly good year. And at the end of it, when it came to the 2015 conference, and I'm standing up, and I told them it would take 3 years to fix the money the previous year, and I stood up and I said, it's sorted. We're now back in the black, and we're back in the black by £2,000, which from 37,000 with a loss as it was at the end of the fiscal year, it was great. And that wasn't me, right? That was folk like Peter Hughes, Bobby Kay, and you know, folk who were out raising money, getting income streams in the go. Wasn't me. Jane Brown ran a nationwide raffle on her own because nobody else would do it. Right? I mean, that was the folk I was working with. They were brilliant. They really were. And whilst the Federation is its dark side, there are folk who are in there without hesitation of a doubt for their own best interests and not that of Robert Burns or the word of Robert Burns. The Federation still needs to exist, Bobby, because if we didn't have a Federation, we need to invent one. Something needs, where you need something you can hang the umbrellas on. And the Federation's the right place for it for me. And now they're in a great place. They really are. And they've got some very professional folk, and they have had for a few years now, some very professional folk at the helm. And for me, the only embarrassing thing they've done in all that time is the last conference at Irvine, they made a fool of me. But that was my own fault, because I should have saw it coming, but they were too wide for me.
Of all the Burns poems and songs, I'll not get you to sing because I've heard you sing. What's your favourite poem, Jim, and why? And if you can give us a couple of verses from it.
Yeah, Bobby, that's like saying, what's your favourite Wayne? You know, what's your favourite Grand Wayne? There's so many. I mean, Thomas Shanter, to me, is a work of genius. Man was made to mourn. I just adore. I love it, particularly the first verse, because it just describes how I feel a lot of the time. And but there are others. But the one I go back to, Jim Haslett introduced me to Epistle to a Young Friend, and it struck me that if I was going to be reciting anything other than a node to the poem To a Haggis, because folks say the address to a haggis, it's To a Haggis is the title of the poem. If I was doing anything other than that, it would be this. Although I've done Thomas Shanter a few times over the years because I had to, because they wanted it and there was nobody there. And I know the words, and that's the issue for me is quite simple. I tend not to do Burns readings unless I really, really, really have to. Now, I might know the words or something, but I can't engage people the way folk you do. Right? It's as simple as that. I don't have the ability to draw folk in and tell the story that's written on the page. I just don't. And I understand that and I know why. So I just do other stuff if I'm at Burns nights and things like that to stay away from it. But I suppose my favourite in terms of doing a verse or two would be The Pursuit of a Young Friend, which is I just think is Burns is absolute best and worst at the same time in terms of, you know, the hypocrisy of Burns, and because that's what makes him. It's his character. It's how different he is day to day. A lonely thought, my youthful friend, or something to have sent me. Though it served the other end and just a kind momentum. How the subject thing me gang, time or chance determine. Perhaps it may turn out to sand. Perhaps turn out to certain. You'll try the world soon, my lad, in 100 years, believe me, you'll find mankind an uncascad, and muckle the gravy. Care and trouble set your thought when your ends attained, and all your views may come to know, when every man is slain. I'm not saying men are villains or the real hard and wicked, but any check, but human law or tay a few restricted. But mankind are awake, and little to be trusted. When self the wavering balance shake, it's rarely right adjusted. Yet them we fought the fortune strife, their fate we should be censured. For at the important end of life, they equally may answer. A man may have an honest heart, yet porteth early steering. A man may take a neighbour's part, yet he may cash to spare him. And now my favourite Burns verse. What comes next? And I'm not going to do it, just with that absolute annoying you. Come on, what's next?
I free up on your story tell. When we are bosom crony, but still keep something to yourself, you scarcely tell to own it. Conceal yourself. Go on, sorry, Jim.
No, I was just saying the first 4 lines. I worked with them all my working life.
You're doing your own injustice, Jim. You're doing your own injustice with reciting. Honestly, you're excellent at it, and I've heard you many times in our Zoom meetings. I think you're doing yourself a severe injustice, pal.
No, I generally, I'm in awe, and I always have been, Bobby, of people who, and some of the folk I've heard doing readings over the years. When I think back to, Jim Brown, first time I heard him doing Tam O'Shanter, first time I saw you doing Tam the Bonnet, I nearly fell off the seat. Right, seriously, I mean, and some of the others that I've heard over the years who have just absolutely transported me. I mean, Billy Horn doing the Holy Fair was just I mean, it was something to behold, and I hope when we get to do something about Billy Horn on this podcast, we can get him doing that, because it's particularly special, and of course Laprake. I've heard, which is one of my favourites as well. I've heard, I don't know how many people over the years at the Laprake competition doing Laprake. Bob and Billy won it the first year, but and you've won it, right? But I mean, the folk who won it over the 10 years it was in existence, I was sitting there every year going, how did these folk do that? Because you're part of it. You're living the poem. I can't do that. I've never been able to do.
Can I just final plug for you is you do tours in about Kilmarnock. How would folk get in touch with you if they want to come up or down to Kilmarnock?
Right, aye, well, in terms of, I do Tam O'Shanter's ride. I take folk round Meg's ride from Tam O'Shanter in here. Starting and finishing at the Birthplace Museum. I do that mostly in the summer, and it's mostly Americans I do, although I've done quite a few Burns clubs now and various other groups. In terms of Kilmarnock, anytime they can just contact me. I don't know whether you can put my email address on the credits of this, I suppose.
Yeah, can do that, Jim.
And they can just contact me by email, or they can phone me. And we can put that on as well. It's not a problem. What I would say to folk, if you want to do Kilmarnock, the Killie Burns summer that happened last year is going to be repeated this year, and there'll be folk like myself or Jimmy Gibson, if he's available, to take you around, to take walks of Kilmarnock, because Kilmarnock, Jimmy Gibson's. In fact, I've been reading the rough copy of his next of a publication, we hope, is Burns and Kilmarnock, and it's just amazing how integral Kilmarnock is to the Burns story. It really is. And having lived in Kilmarnock all these years, I've known that, but I didn't realise I knew it until I started reading what Jimmy had written. And taking folk around the Kilmarnock tours, it's a couple of hours out your day, but it's really, really interesting stuff, particularly, in the Dick Institute, where a lot of the stuff is.
Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Jim, you seem to have missed me off your list of recitation heroes. But maybe see if we can edit something in later on. But in the meantime, just want to say thank you very much for telling us all about your life with Robert Burns. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I should also say thank you for Bobby. Thank you to Bobby for standing in as an interviewer for the day. Thanks very much, Bobby.
been an absolute pleasure, my friends, both of you. Thank you.